So good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the Haley Public Library. We are continuing to highlight the work of the Wood River Valley Wildlife Smart Communities Coalition with a series of talks about key wildlife species and how we can live responsibly around them. Tonight, Sawtooth National Recreation Area wildlife biologist Robin Garwood will talk with us about the bear facts. And let me introduce her to you. Robin is a wildlife biologist and has been working for the Sawtooth National Recreation Area for 30 years. She has also worked for the Forest Service in Colorado and Utah. Besides her association with the Forest Service, she has also worked in Idaho for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game and the Bureau of Land Management. She has a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries science from the University of Tennessee and a master's degree in raptor biology from Boise State University. Her professional expertise includes habitat restoration and the recreational effects on wildlife. She lives here in Haley and is an avid bird watcher and a beginning butterfly and bee watcher. So welcome, Robin. It is great to have you here this evening. Robin and I worked together many years ago, actually, when I was working at the Sawtooth National Recreation Area as an interpretive naturalist. So you will need to unmute yourself. And I think we can just get going. So welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to share some facts about bears with us.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And yeah, I remember when you were at the recreation area, you considered yourself a plant enthusiast. And I think that's always appreciated that. I thought that was great. So yeah, appreciate the introduction and welcome everyone. I guess I'll just go ahead and get started and share my screen if that's all right, Kristen. Try this again.
Needless to say, we practiced this about 10 minutes ago and it worked perfectly. That's just the nature of Zoom. Did you go to slideshow and then start slideshow?
Yeah, no, I'm just actually not getting the screen to share for some reason.
We're seeing it on our end.
Oh, are you?
Yeah,
okay.
We are. We're seeing the little tiles.
Okay, interesting. I'm not, but okay. Do this one more time. Okay, you're seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
But you're not seeing it, huh?
Okay, here we go.
Okay, great.
Now I am. Yeah,
Good.
sorry about that. Sorry, guys. Okay, so yeah, I think as we all know, we here in the Wood River Valley live in black bear country. And I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. And I guess just maybe a little bit of sort of management background, a little bit of a policy lesson here, so that, you know, as I think we all know, all wildlife in the state of Idaho and all states are managed by the state. So black bears are managed by Idaho Department of Fish and Game and land management agencies, including the Forest Service, who I worked for, deal with the land, right? We you know, there's multiple use on the lands, but it also includes, you know, maintaining wildlife habitat. So in Idaho, bears are hunted. There are hunting seasons in both the spring and the fall. And Idaho is one of the few states that still allows baiting. So if you guys have been out and about in the woods in the spring and fall, you may have even come upon bear baiting, but that is still allowed in Idaho. That is still legitimate. I'll give a little bit of background on taxonomy of bears. So they're in the class Mammalia and in the order Carnivora. I think, again, we all probably all know that, family Ursidae. And Ursus americanus is the scientific name. They only occur in North America. Here in the Wood River Valley, we do not have grizzly bears yet that we know of. Grizzly bears were here historically. There's been some advocates of reintroducing grizzly bears into our area, and that, of course, hasn't happened yet. But there are those who would like to see that, and that may be in the works under this administration, this current administration. So historically, they occurred from pretty much all across North America, as I said, from Canada to Mexico and northern Mexico, California to Florida. But within Idaho, this is more or less their range. So they're pretty much throughout the state, as I mentioned, in forested areas. The range has shrunk a little bit range wide. They're not as widespread as they were prior to European settlement, but they still do occur pretty much throughout our state. So Fish and Game is the agency that monitors their population, and they will admit that they are very imprecise in doing that, but they do estimate that there are 20 to 30,000 black bears in the state. And maybe you have encountered them, but they can be quite elusive. And I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk about how they're, in some cases, not elusive. But when you're out and about hiking around in the forest or on public land, you may not see them, but they are probably around. Maybe they're watching you or smelling you, but you're not seeing them. So a little bit about black bear characteristics. I think we probably all think of black bears as black pelaged or really dark pelaged, but they come in quite a range of colors. From these pictures show from very, very, very dark brown, almost black, to brown, grizzly bear looking in that upper picture, to blonde. The blonde pelage is somewhat rare. The brown pelage, however, is very, very common, and it's pretty common in our area. In fact, in my experience in observing black bears on the Sawtooth National Forest, is I see more brown bears than black bears, and some black pelaged bears. And sometimes people mistake, or they see a brown bear and think grizzly bear. That's just sort of the natural, I think, reaction when you see a brown bear. But that's very, very unlikely the case. I never say never when it comes to wildlife observations and where animals end up, but it's very, very unlikely that you would see a grizzly bear on the Sawtooth Forest, for example, or really within central Idaho at this point.
Robin, could you talk a little bit too about the difference between black bears and grizzly bears? That would be helpful.
Right. I should have included a slide that shows actually some of the characteristics, because I have the state has put out these little cards that show the things to look for. But probably the main thing is if you can get a look at their face, or actually their whole body and profile. Grizzly bears tend to have a hump on their I guess you'd say above their front legs, so that their shoulders are sort of humped, and their face is very dished looking, if you can get a view of it in profile. So those are probably the main things that you would look for, that you would be able to see right off, in just viewing a bear or putting your binoculars on it. Just the hump, which is pretty obvious if you like I said, I wish I should have put up a slide of a grizzly bear on here, but I actually didn't include that. But yeah, certainly Idaho has grizzly bears in eastern Idaho and the Yellowstone ecosystem, and then in extreme northern Idaho. But as I said, they're yet to come here. So size, it's funny. There's a researcher friend of mine. He researches black bears, and he said, almost everybody he talks to, when they say they've seen a bear, they say it was 500 pounds. It's the biggest thing they ever saw. Biggest bear I ever saw was 500 pounds. Everybody tends to exaggerate the size. And I think it's because when you come upon a bear, it's impressive and it just looks big. But really, bears in Idaho, the black bears in Idaho, aren't huge. Male average 180 to 250 pounds. 300-pound black bear for Idaho is pretty big. Females are 120 to 150, maybe 180 pounds. So could be as small as 100 pounds even. So they're not necessarily huge animals, particularly in Idaho. Now, there are some places where, particularly that I've seen in East Tennessee, in Pennsylvania, I've seen black bears that can get 350, bigger, but it really depends on their food source. So, the better food supply, the bigger they're going to get. But in Idaho, they just typically don't get that big.
So someone just asked a provocative question. If so many of them are brown, why are they called black bears?
That's a really good question. Yeah, and I think that has to do with, I'm speculating a little bit, but I think that has to do with, it's really the European Americans that developed the taxonomy and, named bears, both the scientific and the common names. And because in the eastern United States, the common pelage is this darker black color, and it was probably where Europeans first saw this species, is why it's black bear, because that was the common pelage when Europeans first came to this continent and saw this animal. So that's likely it. Sort of interesting fact, and this sort of holds, I think, for all animals in their pelage color. The darker pelage tends to be more associated with humid and more maybe denser forested areas, and then the lighter pelages in the more arid areas, and so that makes sense, and that certainly holds for Idaho, being a drier state than say East Tennessee or Pennsylvania, and then we have this more prevalent brown pelage than black pelage. But yeah, good question. And so these are bear prints. To me, they almost look human. And so black bears have 5 toes. They have the plantigrade stance like humans, unlike dogs and cats, which basically walk on their toes. Bears walk on their toes and heels, again, like humans do. So the track size average for the front foot, 4.5 by 4 inches, back foot 7 by 3.5. So the first number I mentioned being the length, and the second number being the width. Yeah, you'll often see these prints in the spring because you can, the prints show up best in snow, obviously, and in muddy areas too. But yeah, so this is what a print looks like. So if you come upon that, really, to me, it's unmistakable. There's really nothing else that has a print like that. So home range size, I'll go into a little bit about that. So it really is related to food availability, the size of their home range. So as you can imagine, if their food availability is high, ranges tend to be a little smaller, and it doesn't have to search and wander as much to find food, so their ranges tend to be smaller. But in Idaho, an average for male is about 56 square miles, 56 square miles, and females quite a bit smaller than that, maybe 12 to 20 square miles. And so typical for carnivores, or they actually maintain somewhat exclusive territories. So males have these territories that they tend to exclude other males from, though they will overlap with females. So one male may overlap with 2 or 3 female home ranges. That's pretty typical for bears in general, and for even members of the weasel family. So wolverines and weasels and marten and fisher have a similar arrangement of the social structure, you could say, with one male overlapping a few females that he will most likely breed with. So,
Robin, we've got another question actually back on the coloration part. Someone asks, is there a separate species of brown bear in the eastern North America?
And not a separate species. So black bear is Ursus americanus. And it's a good question. There might be subspecies. I'd have to look that up to know if there are subspecies, but probably not, because I think that they can all interbreed. So no, it's just this pelage difference, and that's really the only thing. It's the same species. It's Ursus americanus.
And were there grizzly bears? I know we're talking about black bears, but were there grizzly bears in the eastern part of the United States?
There were.
Mm.
Yeah. They got extirpated fairly quickly, European settlement, but yeah. So yeah, that's the home ranges for bears. So food, and I say natural food because we'll be talking about not necessarily natural food here later on in the talk, but they really eat a variety. They are, even though they're in the order carnivora, they're actually considered omnivores, so they'll eat pretty much anything that they can find. They're very food driven, so they'll eat vegetation, grasses, and forbs, and that tends to be their main diet in the spring when they come out of their dens. Of course, they're associated with berries. That's what everybody thinks of, and that truly is a main part of their diet. All sorts of soft mast, we call that, all sorts of species of berries. So that picture on the top right is a black bear and a whitebark pine eating whitebark pine cones and seeds that whitebark pine produce. So for those of you that don't know, whitebark pine produces seeds similar to pinyon pine, so very, very large relative to most pine species. And I think maybe some of you have heard the grizzly bear whitebark pine story, where particularly in the Yellowstone area, whitebark pine is some years critical for grizzly bears to have successful reproduction or successful survival of their young. It's a major food source when whitebark are masting, which they don't do every year. But in the Yellowstone ecosystem, they'll since grizzly bears aren't as prone to climb, what they do actually is raid squirrel caches of the seed. But bears will actually climb to get the seed. And of course, carrion bears will definitely come to carrion. They will even hunt and take down deer, smaller animals, deer, fawns and calves is what they have to go after mostly, but they'll really eat whatever they can find. So I think we all know, sort of again, sort of the iconic thing about bears is that they den. And in our part of the world, they tend to go into their dens mid-October or so, and they seek any kind of little cubby they can find. So a cavity in a tree, a hole in the ground, a hole in the ground under a log, any just sort of confined, tight space that's somewhat insulated. So it's also a bit of a debate about whether bears truly hibernate. There are, I guess you could call it, degrees of hibernation. Bears, their heart rate drops, the respiration drops, but their body temperature doesn't drop all that much, only about maybe up to 5 degrees. What we consider like true hibernators, their body temperature drops drastically, so several tens of degrees, and bears don't do that, although they're, as I mentioned, the metabolism really slows down, so they don't awaken. Although some true hibernators actually do awaken during the winter, but bears don't. They don't urinate, they don't defecate, they don't feed at all. One researcher referred to it, rather than hibernation, carnivorian lethargy or lethargy. So we want to said it's not really true hibernation, but there is a physiological change that they do go through, obviously, through the winter, and they, as I mentioned, spend 5 to 6 months of their life in a den. So
How do they breathe under the snow? I mean, I was just thinking being up in the Sawtooth and there could be 5 or 6 feet of snow once they start to hibernate. How does that, well, I guess they don't need that
That's a good,
much breath, but
yeah, they're obviously not, I mean, they are still breathing. I mean, that's a good question. I guess I don't really know
mm,
about that. In some cases, if they're up in a tree, they may not be under snow, a cavity that's high up, but if they're certainly under the ground or under a log or down tree, that is a good question. I guess I'm assuming that there's enough, porousness within the snow that they're not completely being suffocated. They're still getting oxygen. But yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, that's interesting. So they'll emerge from their dens in our area again, maybe mid-April or so. I've actually seen them earlier than that, and I think with climate change, it's trying to be documented that they're actually coming out a little bit earlier than they did historically. And then I'll go a little bit into reproduction. Bears are a little bit unique in that they have delayed implantation. So that means that they generally breed in the summer, usually, midsummer. But the cubs aren't born until they're born in the den, generally late January, maybe early February. So so they mate. So when they mate, the embryo is fertilized, or the eggs fertilize, the embryo forms, but it doesn't actually implant into the uterus until the bear enters the den. So it doesn't actually start to grow until it implants, and that is delayed. So females generally don't reproduce until they, interestingly enough, it's not necessarily an age, it's a weight. So it's been documented that they really won't breed unless they're at least 100 pounds. And that's generally at maybe as early as 4 years. It may take longer, maybe up to 7 years. It may take them to get to that weight. But yeah. So, anyways, I mentioned they have the cubs in the den, and while they're still basically, I'll use the term hibernating, but while they're still basically asleep or in their lethargic state in the den. The cubs generally weigh just ounces, like maybe 8 ounces, 10 ounces when they're first born. And then they all emerge together. Obviously, the female emerges with the young. The cubs are basically born blind. It takes them almost a month for them for their eyes to open. And by that time they are ready to come out of the den. So they stay with mom for about 5 months. Or I'm sorry, they nurse for about 5 months, and are weaned at about 5 months. They actually tend to stay with their mother for a little over a year. So usually it's by their second June of life that they start to become independent from their mom, and then try to find their own territories and start the whole cycle of a bear's life at that point. But it takes a little over a year for them to learn how to be a bear and how to get food. So I'm gonna, I guess maybe I'll stop here though and see if there are any other questions about just the life history of bears. I didn't, just sort of a brief introduction, but if not, I'll move on to more about what what the human relationships with bears. And so this was I really like this this particular quote, this bit of wisdom, because I think it acknowledges what's really essential to these species in nature. And that last part, when a pine needle falls, the bear smells it, is really, I think, profound, in that that's what bears are really driven by, their sense of smell. It's really how they make it through life and how they find food. They really rely on their smell. And then sort of on the lighter side, this is one of my favorite Far Side cartoons, for those of us old enough to remember Gary Larson, Far Side. Again, one of my favorites that really speaks to the lengths that bears will go to obtain food. So we'll be getting into that a little bit, but you know, they can be quite ingenious in getting food. You know, this is what I think we all have heard about, or if not witnessed ourselves in the Wood River Valley. Bears getting into food that's basically provided to them by humans. So you know, as I mentioned in the slide about natural foods, bears will eat anything, and when, well, a couple things. When there's a failure of, say, you know, a berry crop in a particular year, you know, they just can't, you know, often it's a drought year where they can't find food, then they will truly go in search of human food. And but other bears just will get used to, they may inadvertently come upon human food or garbage someplace and get a taste for it and associating humans with food. You know, there are people that will intentionally feed bears, and so obviously then the bear, you know, gets a taste for it too. You know, the bird feeder issue is fairly common, pretty much range wide for black bears. So I think, again, as we all know, as bears get habituated to human food, they'll tend to get bolder and bolder and bolder. You know, they may break into houses even if they can get through a window, or often it's a screen door. And then, you know, ultimately, again, as we know, sadly, bears that get too bold then have to be put down. Generally is what Fish and Game will do. They occasionally will try to live trap and move a bear, but that usually just causes a problem somewhere else, because once a bear gets as I mentioned, taste for human food, it's tough to decondition them from that. So what can we do as a community? So, you know, it really comes down to keeping these things that attract bears into our homes unavailable to them, and that's often garbage, but there are other things that attract bears. You know, anything that they said, bird feeders, dog food. If you store your dog food outside, you know, that will attract them as well. So it's really it's the responsibility of us as people that live in bear country and live within bear habitat, and really prime bear habitat, particularly in the Ketchum area, and north more so in Haley, but even parts of Haley, we have good bear habitat. So at home, what can we do? Well, there are, you know, a handful of things. So securing garbage and in a shed or in your garage, only putting it out the morning of trash pickup. That's, I know, inconvenient for a lot of us to do that, but that's really one of the best things that we can do. Again, particularly in the Ketchum Sun Valley area. Not feeding birds during the months when bears are active. I know that's a really hard one. It's a hard one for me because I'm a bird watcher. I put feeders out in the winter. And if you do put feeders out, maybe at the very least bring them in at night. Even though, you know, bears are active during the day, but they probably are more likely to come around and try to get food at night. But not always. They'll come during the day too. Don't leave pet food outside, as I mentioned before. That's a huge attractant. So keep that secured in a garage or a shed. This is a tough one too, because fruit trees, you know, we like that, fruit and berry trees, but the berry thing is hard. But if you have fruit trees, just to keep the fruit that does fall to the ground picked up, and you know, and another problem is compost piles. Our compost piles, I mean, bears getting into that, but you know, that's another tough one. But you know, none of these things are really going to totally prevent bear encounters, but we're trying to minimize as best we can. Is probably the best we can do. And then the last thing I'll mention is to not leave windows or screen doors open when you're not home. there are many stories from Fish and Game about bears getting in houses because they could just walk right through a screen door or through a window that's just screened. And again, in the summer, I know that's tough. We all like to have our screens open in the summer, but again, being mindful that you might have an unexpected guest when you get home or visitor when you get home. And these are all things that as Kristen mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the Wood River Valley Wildlife Smart Communities Coalition is thinking about, and I'll just go there now a little bit about that group. So yes, it's a fairly new group started by Fish and Game, and there are many partners involved: the cities in the Wood River Valley and the county, Conservation League, the federal government agencies, coming together to try to come up with some solutions for people for us living in bear country. And we're at this point trying to tackle the garbage issue and looking at how we can get bear resistant garbage containers for every citizen of the Wood River Valley. We're stalled a little bit in that effort, but that's one of the things we feel like we can make the most headway on. Other communities, we're certainly not the only community that has had issues with black bears, and there are other communities that have gone to the bear resistant trash cans and have seen fairly drastic reductions in issues with black bears in their communities. But I'll move on here a little bit to talk about more what we've been doing on public land, what you can do when you're out recreating or camping. So again, these are, maybe you guys have even had this all happen, bear visiting your picnic table, bear visiting your campsite, bears in dumpsters. At least most of I think probably all of the Forest Service dumpsters on the Sawtooth Forest are now bear resistant, but there may be a few exceptions to that. But we have, over the years, because of the issues that we've had at our campgrounds and our dispersed camping sites, gone to at least bear resistant dumpsters, and we're working on all of our trash cans, getting them there. So, on the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, because, well, this is a little bit of speculation, but I think it's because we have so many developed campgrounds. So this is the recreation area. I think most of you know that, but it's basically north of Ketchum. It's from North Fork of the Big Wood River all the way to Galena Pass, and then over Galena Pass, headwaters of the Salmon, to Stanley, and even west of Stanley. That's all the recreation area. We have a lot of developed campgrounds there. We've had bears coming into campgrounds off and on over the years for my whole career here, which is, as Kristen mentioned, has been 30 years. So Fish and Game has talked to us over the years about how most of the bear issues that they tally up occur on the recreation area, at least within the salmon Fish and Game region. So we just last year put this food storage order into place. And for any of you who have camped or recreated in grizzly bear country, may be familiar with this type of regulation. And it's been required in grizzly bear country for many years. But what it entails, well, first I'll just talk about when it's in place. We're actually not even having it be in place for the whole time that bears are out, but basically from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend. And again, for us, it's really right now the front country. So we're not requiring food storage within the designated wilderness area. So that would be the Sawtooth Wilderness, the Boulder Wilderness, and the White Clouds Wilderness. So that's where it's in effect. And so the way the order reads, and the way the regulation reads, is that all food and refuse must be acceptably stored during nighttime hours, or while you're basically not attending it, while you're not there around it, attending it at your campsite or your recreation residence, for example. And then there's a definition of acceptably stored. And acceptably stored means for at least for our order, in a lock bear resistant container, which there are several of those available for purchase, or in a closed vehicle, basically a hard-sided vehicle, so not like a pop-up camper, or in a hard-sided residence or building. So I'll say this, though, I think we all have heard of bears breaking into vehicles. Bears are strong enough to basically peel a door off of a car. But we decided to start slowly with this order. And because the recreation area doesn't have the infrastructure in place to provide storage, bear-resistant storage containers at all of our campsites and dispersed campsites, we're not there yet. We're just saying we would like people to put their all of their attractants in their vehicles. If our bears start, and it almost seems like it's a learned cultural thing with bears. If we start to see lots of bears breaking into vehicles, then we probably will modify this and try to start providing these lockers at our developed sites. For those of you who know anything about the Yosemite area in California, they have lots of black bear issues, and bears in that area frequently break into vehicles. As I mentioned, it's almost like it's a passed on sort of skill or knowledge, like culture. So anyway, that's the more front country. And then, so if you are then camping outside of backcountry camping, but not in the wilderness, then this order is still in place. And there are various ways to secure your food when you're backcountry camping or backpacking. And the main way is to suspend it from a tree. And so the general guidelines are 10 feet above the ground and 4 feet away from the trunk of the tree. You can also purchase, and again, this has been developed because of people recreating in grizzly bear country, but some backpacking bear resistant containers. So lighter weight containers, even like made of Kevlar, I think Kevlar bags I've seen where you can put your food in, and supposedly it's bear resistant, more or less bear resistant. I always felt like hanging my food when I'm backpacking not just keeps away from bears, but also from ground squirrels, which they can be quite a nuisance when you're camping as well. So this is basically the essence of the order, and it applies to everybody that recreates on the recreation area. It applies to employees. It applies to everyone that is there. And so we consider attractants to be, as I mentioned before, more than just food and trash. It's also toiletries, livestock feed, animal carcasses. There is one actually exemption to this. It may seem counterintuitive, and it really probably is, but people that are legally bear baiting to hunt bears are exempt from this. So to bait bears, one is basically putting out food to draw them in, and so that practice is exempt from this order. Yeah, so all of these things, and this isn't really even a complete list of all of the things that might attract a bear. As I mentioned, and as we all know, they are so driven by their sense of smell that any of these things can draw them into your campsite or to your backyard, really. So again, just a little recap: proper storage. You may see these if you're out on any of our developed sites on the picnic tables. This is just to remind people of the whole issue that they are in bear country, or we are in bear country, and these are all of the things that you need to be putting away properly or storing properly. And again, either putting in the hard-sided vehicle or hanging if you're not near your vehicle. We are, as I mentioned, right now we're not requiring people to put their attractants in storage containers, but there is one campground, developed campground on the recreation area that you can't drive to. It's the campground that's across Redfish Lake Inlet, and we are going to put storage lockers there because obviously you can't put your occupants in your vehicle. That's at that campsite, at that developed campsite. But in this, again, I'll just reiterate, this order applies to not just developed campsites, but also all dispersed areas outside of wilderness.
So could you talk a little bit, Robin, about somebody asked a question about toiletries. Why would toiletries be attracting bears?
Yeah, well, if you think about some of the toiletry smells, like toothpaste, for example, that's definitely an attractant. The minty smell, or the spearminty smell. Could shampoos, there's all kinds of shampoos that have apple smell, or who knows, all kinds of fruity smells that would attract bears. So those are the two biggies, I think. Soaps, different kinds of soaps also have a desirable smell. So yeah, bears, they're not necessarily that discriminating. So anything that just kind of smells like food can bring them in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I thought I too would mention a little bit, what to do if you encounter a bear when you're out hiking, for example, or just out out and about, recreating or camping, hiking, whatever. What you would want to do or not do. There are several scenarios that one might come upon with a black bear encounter. So if you see a bear, but it's not that close to you, but it's maybe in the direction that you're heading, just think about an alternate route, or maybe giving it a wide berth. Maybe if it looks like you're going to encounter it as you continue on the trail, maybe go off trail a little bit to get around it. Sort of plan a little bit of a detour. Not necessarily turn around, but just a detour around where the bear is. If it approaches you or charges, you don't want to run, because that is, like a lot of animals, that can trigger that chase instinct. Bears will often bluff charge. It's it can be quite intimidating and difficult to hold your ground when a bear is charging, but they will just bluff charge, which means they'll run up to you, but then they'll stop before they actually jump on you or attack you. So if you can muster the courage, just standing your ground, and then I'll mention what to do if it that gets more out of hand. So if it doesn't leave and it looks like it maybe is going to kind of hang around, or it's continuing to make bluff charges or little lunges at you, then with black bears, you again, don't run. Just make yourself look big, yell, maybe even throw something, throw rocks. You're basically just trying to intimidate the bear and make it leave. So you could use even bear spray if I know we're not in this, we're not really, it's not a habit for us in this country to hike with bear spray, but as with grizzlies, it could work, and particularly if it charges you and is coming at you, and I guess you wouldn't necessarily know if it's bluff charging you. You could spray it anyway, and then so if it actually does attack you, then fighting back is what is recommended for black bears. Again, because they're not quite the size of grizzly bears, you may have more of a chance of making them back off if you fight back, and again, kick, hit, whatever, as best you can, fight back. And again, if you have pepper spray, use that. So let's see then I guess too, just another thing to think about, and this is really good, just a good sort of situational awareness hiking tip anyway, is just always stay alert when you're hiking, and that's really for any kind of wildlife that for mountain lions, which is another species that potentially could attack. We've not ever had that. I don't think we've had any instances in Idaho, and certainly not on the Sawtooth. But anyway, being just being alert, being aware of your surroundings, looking ahead at what might be in front of you, and I think that's always good advice when you're hiking in our backcountry. So the Sawtooth Forest website has more information on bears and particularly the food storage order. So if you go to that, I think you just Google Sawtooth National Forest and go to the main page. There's a Be Bear Aware link on the right side of the page, I believe. That'll take you to a bunch of information on bears on the Sawtooth Forest and on the food storage order. I think with that, I don't know what time it is, but I'll just take questions. There's the link. And then too, I want to mention a book, since this is a library talk. It's an old book, but older book, but let's see if I can show this. It's kind of glaring. It's called A Shadow in the Forest, Idaho's Black Bear. So it's specifically about black bears in Idaho. And this is a researcher, a longtime black bear researcher. It's an older book, like I said, I think it was published in the 90s, but it's by John Beecham and Jeff Rollman. They are both Fish and Game employees, Fish and Game researchers who spent their whole careers on researching black bears in Idaho. And so yeah, I recommend it. It's it's not really technical, but it does talk about there's some data cited in it, but it's quite detailed about black bears. So yeah, I guess with that, I'll just take questions if there are any.
I appreciate that book recommendation because usually I highlight a book that we have here at the library to feature, but it turns out we have several books for little kids, about black bears and black bear facts. But I will recommend that we get a copy of this book so that we have one good book on black bears.
I think that would be good, and somewhat of a local book as well.
Yeah.
It's specific to Idaho. So yeah.
And then I had just a kind of a personal question. I guess it was hard to miss for me that some of those pictures that you showed us looked like the people had just left the picnic table and their food was still on it, the cup was still on it. What do you do if you're camping like that and a bear ambles
just
into your
walks up
campsite?
Right. Yeah, that's a difficult one. So those pictures are bears that have really progressed to the point of being very, very bold. And obviously, you could have followed all of the food storage orders. You're there. You're attending your food. You're eating. You're sitting around your table eating. And a bear walks up. Yeah. What do you do? So that's actually a common. That when I lived in East Tennessee and recreated in Smoky Mountain National Park, that was actually a common thing to see, is a bear just wandering into the family's meal. That's where what you would want to back off. You want to just let the bear do its thing. You don't want to stay right in its way and block in its way of a food source. But I think what I would do is then, once you've backed off, do the throwing things and yelling and just try to make its experience as distasteful as possible. It may not work because they're so food driven, and you can be pelting them with rocks and they may not even notice. But yeah, when there's really not a lot to do at that point other than just try to get it to leave, and then let it leave on its own if it won't leave, and then then you call Fish and Game. Unfortunately, that's what the Fish and Game, or the Forest Service, which we can pass it on to Fish and Game. And then that bear may have to be, Fish and Game may make the decision to put that bear down, maybe trap it, but like I said, Fish and Game is getting away from the live trapping and moving, particularly a bear that's gone that far down the road of being not afraid of people.
And then, yeah, is there any chance that that bear that was two bears that were standing on top of the picnic table and you throw rocks at them, is there any chance that they will get angry and charge you at that point?
Again, I'd never say never, so yes, that's possible. That is possible. Yeah, it's probably unlikely, that they're probably more likely to just run away than charge you. The charge situation, usually when the charge situations, if they're surprised, the classic of getting between a sow and her cub, that's a certain, I should have mentioned that earlier, that's a definite no. You don't always know that though, unfortunately, if you're hiking along and just, you're not seeing the bears, and all of a sudden, you see this bear and she's bluff charging you, and then you realize, oh yeah, there's a cub, over there between them. So but then that's part of being that situational awareness, being aware. But it is a bit of a risk that if you try the aversive conditioning, that'll make the bear mad, but most likely it'll either ignore you or it will leave. It'll ignore the pelting and the yelling and all that.
Somebody jokes, it sounds like we should make sure we have rocks with us if we hike or picnic.
Right. Yeah, we're just more weight to carry, right? You hike
Yeah.
with a bag of rocks.
Right.
Yeah.
And then somebody else asks, how do you fight back? I mean, they've got long claws and they're wild animals, so they're super strong. And I mean, can you
Yeah,
give some
right.
guidance on that? I mean, do you
Yeah,
go for the
well,
fakes or?
yeah, I mean, the vulnerable parts, like with humans, you would attack, hit them in the nose,
Okay.
kick, punch. Yeah, there's no real, strict protocol on that. It's whatever you can do, again, think about it, I guess, as if you were being attacked by a human. The vulnerable spots, the genital area and the nose tend to be, some of the more sensitive areas on bears as humans. So if you can get to those spots, but yeah, if it's attacking you, you're most likely gonna have to kick it and kick and punch, I guess is what I would advise.
Okay, thanks. And then I know grizzly bears raise up on their legs, if I remember correctly, to smell, to get a better sense of smell. Do black
Mhm.
bears do that too?
Yeah, they will. They'll stand up and even try to, their eyesight isn't the best. And so, they may stand up, even try to get a better view and try to figure out what you are.
Mm-hmm.
If they aren't familiar with humans. But yes, and get a better sense of smell. But yeah, they will. They'll stand up.
But that's not necessarily a sign of aggression. I mean,
It's not necessarily
I
a
can
sign of
imagine it would be
aggression,
pretty terrifying to see a bear stand up and where they're just about as big as you are, but it's
particularly
not
if
a
they're very
sign.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a sign of aggression.
Okay.
Maybe more just trying to figure you out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if you see that at that point, maybe yelling, yell, clap your hands, wave your arms. At that point, maybe try to startle it away from you.
And then somebody asks a question, how high can bears climb?
They can climb as high as a branch will support them. If you recall that picture of that bear in the whitebark pine tree,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty far up there because if you guys are familiar with whitebark pine, those cones tend to be at the tips of the branches. That's actually an adaptation to make that the tree has to make its cones available to a bird that disperses its seeds. The Clark's nutcracker is a bird that specifically adapted to get into whitebark pine cones and disperse the seeds. And so the cones are at the tops of the trees, and black bears can get to the tops of those trees. So really, as high as a branch will support them.
Well, and I remember that one picture of the bear looking like he was hanging with front and back legs on the rope that was holding up the bird feeder. And it made me wonder if it was really going to work to hang your feed or your food on a tree like that. But
yeah, well, that's a very good point. There are, as I mentioned before, these aren't 100%, preventative measures. Some bears will learn how to get into anything. It's just as I said, pull a car door off of a car to get into what we've stored in our vehicles. Yeah, tight rope crawl on a rope to get to a hanging bag of food. So yeah, it's not, none of this is 100%. Yeah, that, to me, that picture illustrates the lengths that a bear will go to get food, and particularly one that has learned, those more ingenious ones that have learned that behavior.
The smart ones. And so let's see. I don't see any other questions. So I'm speaking slowly in case somebody has one in the back of their mind and they're madly trying to type it into the chat. Robin, how many black bears would you just guess would be in the SNRA? I mean, are we
Yeah, that's a good
talking
question.
a
Yeah,
dozen
probably,
or
oh no, more than
100
that.
or
Probably more like 100. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It is a really Fish and Game will admit that it's a really difficult species to census. They base their I think population estimates on the harvest.
Mhm.
The Fish and Game does that with many species that are difficult. They have an algorithm of how to estimate population size based on harvest and the hunter effort. And so, but my best guess is, yeah, within the bounds of the NRA 100, or and then really the Ketchum Ranger District is very good bear habitat too. And as I mentioned, this food order only applies to the recreation area, but we do have issues on the Ketchum Ranger District as well. We don't have as many developed campgrounds though, so that's one reason maybe that the district itself doesn't see as many cases. What we see more is the issues in Ketchum itself,
Mm.
and really Bald Mountain. Bald Mountain is really good bear habitat, which part of that is public land, and the base of it's private. But, it's almost the perfect combination of forest and open areas because of the runs that for bears. And so West Ketchum is a perennial problem for Fish and Game. I know with bears getting into garbage and into homes, and even in Warm Springs is another perennial problem area. Yeah, bears. If you talk to Fish and Game officers with Fish and Game that have worked in this area a long time, they have many bear stories. Bears breaking into houses. We've all read those stories in the paper. Bears getting into houses. It's comical to a point, and then until the bear has to get put down. But I know there was a bear. This was years and years ago. A bear in the Warm Springs area that was had developed a taste for ice cream. It had broken into a cabin in Warm Springs, found the freezer. It was probably rummaging for any kind of food it could find. Apparently found ice cream in freezer, ate the ice cream, and then for the next week or so, it was breaking into cabins in Warm Springs and making beelines to the freezers to look for ice cream. So they're smart enough to learn that quickly, and as I've said before, I've said many times, they're so food driven and food motivated that they learn quickly when food is involved.
Well, I thank you very much. And several people have chatted, thank you so much. And I love offering these series because one of the reasons many of us live here is because of the wildlife. And we live in the habitat of the wildlife that we admire. And so trying to learn what we can do to minimize risk, really, well, not only to ourselves, but to risk of these wonderful wildlife species. The natural history part of your presentation with the great images really showed what a magnificent animal a black bear is. And we want to do the right thing. So I'm so pleased that the Wood River Valley started this Wildlife Smart Communities Coalition, and I know you're a part of it. And so thank you on behalf of the Haley Public Library and the whole community for educating us more about black bears and how we can live wisely with them.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate that. Those kind words. Yeah, it really it's I think of it as one of our responsibilities of citizens here is to be mindful, at the very least, be mindful of the species that are around us and their needs, and how we may be impacting them with what we do. We can't, none of us are pure. We can't completely mitigate all of our uh, all of the issues that we cause for wildlife, but I think being mindful and doing what we can is just being a good citizen of where we live.